The hardest part of building your first brick and mortar business isn't actually specific elements like the funding or the construction process. It's a disadvantage that starts early in the roadmap and it follows you through every stage of the build. This video is about that reality and how to plan to counter it before you've already committed. So while funding, location, and construction are major components for sure, the hardest part is something much quieter and much more overarching. It's experience imbalance. When you build your first brick and mortar business, you're almost always the least experienced person in every single important conversation. So what does experience asymmetry mean exactly? You're making a decision you may only make once in your life. And you're making it across the table from people who make that same decision every single week. That's not a moral judgment. No one's doing anything wrong. It's just the reality of the situation. So let's explain this with real examples and real key players. So landlords, you might negotiate one lease. They've negotiated hundreds. They understand the incentives, the triggers, the timing, the leverage in a way that you can't yet understand. Designers, you might talk to 2 or 3 designers in your entire life. They've worked on hundreds of projects. You don't even know how to assess what a good designer looks like yet. Then you have architects. You negotiate with one architect. They've negotiated with hundreds of clients, and they have a large trade body on their side. So they know exactly how to bound their risk. You don't even know where your risk lives yet. Now, general contractors. This might be your only build. For them, it's business as usual. It's what they do their entire lives. They know where the margin hides. You're still learning how costs stack. Banks, they have entire departments dedicated to each individual part of the loan process to protect every one of their risks. You do it once. If they get it wrong, it's a bad loan out of thousands. A rounding error. For you, it could jeopardize the cash flow for your build. So at every step, you're playing an away game. Every step. So for quick context, because it matters to how you interpret everything on this channel. I came from a strategy consulting background, and I eventually left to build a real physical business from scratch. We're sitting in it. It's not a digital business. It's not a media brand. It's an actual operation with real customers, staff, and real constraints. So I documented what I learned along the way because I wished somebody had been able to explain all the pitfalls to me in advance to reduce that exact asymmetry gap that we're talking about today. So why does this gap feel so hard emotionally? Well, this is why the process feels overwhelming in a way that people don't warn you about in advance. Advice feels contradictory, everyone sounds confident, and every decision feels high stakes. Because for you, it actually is. You're not learning what to decide, you're learning how to decide while already committed, and with limited information and experience. So here's an important clarification. I want to be very clear about this. This doesn't mean that designers, architects, contractors, or landlords are out to get you. Most of them are competent, reasonable professionals. But they are optimized for their risk and their gain, not for yours. It's not their job. And when you're inexperienced, you don't yet know how to protect your downside. The real danger, and the biggest danger, isn't making mistakes. Mistakes are absolutely inevitable. It's making key mistakes that it's hard to come back from. They're the ones we want to avoid. That's where things get expensive. If you've ever felt like this is a process that's unfair or confusing or stacked against you, you're not imagining it. It is structurally asymmetric. That's why first-time founders often feel like they're constantly reacting instead of moving forward. The goal isn't to become an architect or a contractor or a banker. The goal is to understand the process well enough that you're no longer the least experienced person in the room. Not the most experienced, just not the least. As a management consultant, I knew a lot about big business. I looked at building my first small business as an experiment. How much of what I learned in big business translates to small business? The short answer, not as much as I'd like. Primarily because building a business is completely different from operating or refining an existing business. And building a small business, to me, is the most difficult version of building a business, in my opinion. Everyone you negotiate with is running their typical playbook, where you're not even sure what the game is yet. That's why, in parallel to building my business, I documented every single step of the journey, the upsides, the downsides, all of it. For me, it's a diary of everything I had to do to get here. But for you, it could be just what you need to close that information asymmetry gap. So for you, this could be just what you need to close that experience asymmetry gap or imbalance. However, if you've already started, then you don't have time to waste. So I'm going to give you principles right now that you can implement right away. So principle 1, learn from real entrepreneurs. If you can, get experience from people who have actually done this. Not theoretical experts, not trade bodies. Talk to real entrepreneurs who have already built physical businesses. Think kind of friend of a friend, ask around. And preferably do this with more complex builds. So a typical gym, for example, is a very simple build out that may not expose many of the challenges that you might see. And don't ask vague questions like, any advice? Ask specific grounded ones. What went well? What went wrong? What turned out to matter more than you expected? How long did it take versus your initial expectations? Which costs inflated and why? Patterns emerge very quickly when you ask those types of questions. Principle number 2, use vendor comparison to learn, not just to shop. So talk to multiple vendors at every step in the chain, even when you think you've already got a favorite. And this is not just to compare prices, but to compare scope, assumptions, and thinking. When one party offers something that a competitor doesn't, that's not a reason to choose yet. It's a reason to ask better questions. Why don't you offer this? How do you approach that part of the process? What trade-offs are you making there? The reactions you will get will teach you more than the proposal itself. And we're here to learn, right? This is forced cram learning in this case. Principle 3, force alignment across the build roadmap. So get professionals to clearly define their outputs. Then validate those output assumptions with the next link in the chain or the next step in the roadmap. Why? The next professional, the next step in the roadmap will have their own concepts about exactly what inputs they need and to what degree of detail they need them to be successful. Think of this like the handoff in a relay race. This handoff is gold when you're exploring scope and responsibilities and getting up to speed quickly, which is exactly what you're trying to do. Here's an example. Ask architects what they need from the design phase and why. Then ask the designers about any outputs that don't align with that. Your job isn't to design the solution, it's to make sure the chain connects cleanly and that you learn from gaining that clarity. Principle 4, talk to reference clients objectively. Talk to actual reference clients, not just getting testimonials. So ask questions that require objective answers. Was the work delivered on time? If not, how late was it? What caused the delay? What costs were unpredictable? How did issues get resolved? These questions are much harder to dodge, and they will tell you far more than were they good ever will. So none of this eliminates your risk, but it will dramatically reduce surprises. In a brick and mortar, surprises often what does the real damage. So, you don't need to become an expert overnight. You just need to be deliberate about how you borrow experience before you're forced to learn everything the hard way. If this kind of real founder, real world breakdown is useful, you'll probably want to stick around. That's what this channel's about.